You begin with the street, the kind that never truly goes dark. Even when the lamps flicker, there's always one glowing, and the windows of bars and bakeries keep breathing a kind of light that feels eternal. You remember being young and peering at those streets with curiosity, clutching the corner of your dress as though fabric could shield you from the pull of mystery. The grown-ups said those streets were dangerous, but to you, they looked like the stage of a play you weren't yet invited to join. You watched figures step out of shadows, women with bright lips and tired eyes, men who moved quickly and kept their collars raised. It seemed like another world, one you couldn't enter, but couldn't look away from either. The human part of this memory is not just the figures or the lights, but the feeling of being small and unseen. You pressed your palms against the cool stone wall and tried to copy the way the women swayed as they walked, balancing on heels too high. It made you laugh at first, your ankles wobbling, but the laughter was soft, almost guilty. That wobble stayed with you, though. You still wonder if practicing that walk was the first time you rehearsed a role you'd end up playing for real. There was a girl's name carved into the wood of a door on that street, Maya. You traced it every time you passed, not knowing who she was, but feeling that maybe she was one of the women. The little swirl of the Y became your favorite part, and you copied it on scraps of paper at home, doodling it with daydreams attached. It was the detail of that letter curling just so that made the street feel alive. Funny how small things, like a loop of a letter, can anchor a memory more firmly than the whole picture. Sometimes when you lie awake now, you wonder what became of Maya. Was she still there when you grew older? Did she ever step away from that street and find a softer life? The thought lingers unanswerable, but feels like a question worth holding on to. Because in that curiosity lies the shape of your own future, waiting quietly at the curb. The night air back then had a particular weight to it, like smoke mixed with perfume. It clung to your clothes even if you only stood at the edge. You remember your mother wrinkling her nose once, brushing your hair and saying, "Don't go too close, it sticks." And she was right. The scent wasn't just a smell, it was a promise, an echo that followed you home no matter how tightly you shut your windows. And maybe, even then, there was a strange comfort in it, because while hunger gnawed at your stomach and silence stretched too long at home, that street always hummed with something alive. People laughed too loud, cars honked, music drifted from cracked windows, life there seemed messy but full. You still wonder if that fullness was what you longed for more than anything, the sense that people were awake and you wouldn't be left alone in the dark. You tilt your head back in memory and picture the lamplight glinting off the cobblestones, rain pooling in uneven dips. You watched women lift their skirts slightly to step over puddles, and for some reason that gesture imprinted on you. Graceful, careful, even when everything else felt rushed. That simple lifting of fabric still comes to you when you step across a wet street, a detail stitched into your muscles. Looking back, you realize it wasn't innocence that made you curious. It was recognition. Something in you knew those streets would one day hold your steps too. It wasn't destiny in a grand sense, not some fated path, but a small magnetism, drawing you closer bit by bit until your own shoes clicked in rhythm with theirs. And tonight, as you close your eyes and follow these words, you sense the hush of that street again, the first flicker of a world you would enter, and the first shadow of a story that became your life. You remember the first street memory as though it's pressed like a faded photograph between the pages of your mind. But there are earlier ones too, gentler in a way, though not without their shadows. You picture yourself small, your feet bare against the cold tiles of a kitchen floor, while the outside world felt much too big to hold. Nights like that were quiet until the hum of the street below crept through the shutters. Carriages once, then buses later, always wheels turning, always voices carried upward. It wasn't the noise that drew you, but the glow. The glow of lanterns, of shop fronts that never closed, of the restless city itself breathing all night long. You would sneak toward the window, tugging at the curtain just enough to peer through, your breath fogging the glass. There, below, you saw the silhouettes of women, always women, walking with a rhythm that wasn't like anyone else you knew. They didn't hurry, and they didn't stroll lazily either. They moved with a practiced sway, each step deliberate, as though they were in on a secret dance you hadn't been taught. As a child, you didn't have the words for what you were seeing. You only felt a tug in your chest, like a thread connecting you to those lights and shadows. Sometimes you'd mimic them, lifting your chin, tilting your shoulders, swaying as you padded across the room. Your mother caught you once, giggled softly, and said, "You'll twist your back if you keep doing that." But she didn't scold. She never scolded about the streets. Perhaps because she knew that curiosity is something you can't forbid. It only grows stronger in silence. One memory stands out clearer than most. A night when the air smelled like roasted chestnuts from a vendor on the corner, mixed with the sharp tang of cigarette smoke. You leaned out farther than you should have, and one of the women looked up. Just for a moment. Her lipstick was too bright for her tired smile, and yet she lifted a hand and gave you the faintest wave. You froze, then waved back with the exaggerated enthusiasm only a child can give. She laughed, a sound soft enough to rise above the noise, and blew you a kiss before turning away. That kiss lingered in your chest longer than it should have. You still wonder if she meant it for you, or if she'd simply been practicing her role even then, offering affection where it didn't quite belong. But to you, at that age, it felt like a secret initiation, a spark of warmth that said, "You see me, and I see you." Later, when the house grew quiet and your mother dozed in her chair, you traced that moment over and over in your mind. The lift of her hand, the curl of her smile, the invisible kiss drifting upward. It was a detail too small to matter to anyone else, but to you, it was enormous. You even practiced blowing kisses to the mirror, watching your reflection grow bolder each time. You didn't understand it, not yet, but you held it close like a talisman. The human part of this memory is not just in the woman's gesture, but in the ache that followed. That ache of wanting to be part of something just beyond your reach, and not knowing whether it was safe or not. Every child knows that feeling at some point, the longing to cross a boundary, to join the older ones, to grow into shoes not yet your size, and you did grow into them. Slowly, but with a kind of inevitability. The night streets no longer belonged only to strangers. They became a map you would follow, step by step, until your name could have been carved into a door, just like Maya's. Even now, you catch yourself wondering about that woman with the wave. Did she ever escape? Did she live a long life, or a short one filled with neon blur? You'll never know. But you hold on to her gesture like a lantern glowing faintly in memory, a reminder that recognition often comes in the smallest acts. A smile, a wave, a kiss that vanishes in the air but stays in your heart forever. And with that, the memory of the first street becomes more than just an image. It becomes the seed of everything that followed. You think now of your mother's tired hands, the way they carried stories without speaking them. They were small hands, but lined early, cracked from soap and endless scrubbing. When you were little, you often watched them more than her face. They moved constantly, kneading dough when she could afford flour, wringing laundry until her knuckles turned red, mending clothes by the thin light of a kerosene lamp. There was something soothing in the rhythm of her work, though you didn't understand the exhaustion behind it then. She hummed softly, almost without realizing it, and the tune threaded through the clatter of pots or the squeak of cloth against a washboard. Sometimes the humming fell into silence, and those silences were heavier than any words she might have spoken. You remember once reaching for her hand while she mended a torn sleeve. She let you hold it for a moment. Her needle paused in the air, then gently slipped free. Not because she didn't want your touch, but because her work couldn't wait. That was the story of her life, love always present, but always interrupted by necessity. You didn't know then how much you'd inherit that pattern. Affection in fleeting sparks, stolen in pauses, never given the luxury of time. One detail stands out even now, the way she rubbed her thumb against her middle finger whenever she was worried. It was almost invisible, a little circle pressed into her own skin. You caught yourself copying it years later, in rooms where strangers talked to you with voices you didn't trust. It became your own secret motion, a way to steady your breathing without anyone noticing. There was a human experience in all of this that echoes universally, the moment you realize your parents are human too. You watched her stumble once, dropping a plate because her arms were too tired. She sat down hard on the chair, tears filling her eyes before she wiped them quickly away. You wanted to fix it, to glue the plate back together, to make her strong again. But all you could do was lean against her, pressing your head to her shoulder. She didn't say thank you. She just rested her chin lightly against your hair, and that was enough. Later, when hunger grew sharper in your household, her hands seemed to shrink even more. The bones stood out, the veins like blue rivers under her skin. She carried the weight of survival, and you carried the image of her doing so. Sometimes when you catch your reflection now, you see her hands in your own, the same angles, the same stubbornness. It startles you, and yet it comforts you too. You still wonder if she knew what path you would one day take. Did she see it in your eyes when you lingered by the window? Did she sense the pull of the streets in your restless questions? Or did she simply hope that work and school would be enough to keep you tethered? These are the questions that linger heavy and unanswerable when you think of her. The smell of soap remains tied to her memory. Not the floral kind sold in shops, but the rough, plain bars she used for everything, clothes, dishes, even her own skin. The scent clung to her fingertips, mixing with bread dough and onion peels, and somehow it was home. Sometimes, after a long night, when perfume and cigarette smoke cling too tightly to your clothes, you imagine washing them away with that soap. You imagine the way it would sting, but leave you clean in a way the city never can. Your mother never had time for stories, but her hands told them anyway. And in your own story, she remains one of the quietest but strongest characters. Because every thread you've carried forward, every touch, every gesture, every survival tactic, traces back to those hands, working endlessly for a life that was always just barely enough. And as you speak now, softly into the night, you feel her presence in the rhythm of your own words. A reminder that sometimes the things we inherit aren't wealth or safety, but gestures, habits, and quiet strength hidden in plain sight. Your father's disappearance is the kind of memory that doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single night where a door slammed and stayed closed forever. It's more like water draining quietly from a glass until one morning you notice it's empty. He was there, and then less there, and then suddenly only the echo of footsteps down the stairs. At first you didn't even understand it. He'd vanish for a few days, return with the smell of alcohol and excuses clinging to him like smoke. He'd laugh too loud, ruffle your hair with a hand that felt both tender and careless, and promise he'd be around more often. And then he wouldn't. You learned to stop believing the promises, though you never stopped listening for them. There's one image you carry more sharply than the rest. A chair at the table, pulled back but never sat in. You remember setting out plates because your mother still hoped, every evening, that he might walk through the door. She'd stir an extra spoon of stew into the pot, as if leaving space for him might conjure him back. But the stew always ended up ladled onto your plate instead. And she'd push it toward you with a tired smile, saying, "Eat, you're growing." You never asked why she never stopped setting that place. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was just habit, and habit can be the cruelest thing of all. The detail that stays with you most vividly is the sound of his shoes. Heavy, uneven steps on the stairs when he finally did come home, the rhythm of leather hitting stone. You'd sit up in bed, straining to hear if he was angry, tired, or just drunk. You learned to read those steps like a language. They told you whether the night would be noisy or quiet, whether the house would be heavy with tension or ease. Even now, when you hear shoes scuffing late at night, your chest tightens, waiting for a father who will never arrive. The human part of this memory is the ache of being left behind, something nearly everyone understands in one way or another. Whether it's a parent, a friend, a lover, everyone has felt that empty chair, that silence where laughter should be. And in that silence, you grow older faster than you should have. There was one night, though, that you hold on to differently. You were sitting by the window, waiting, when he actually appeared. He had a small paper bag in his hand, and inside was a sweet bun dusted with sugar. Just one. He broke it in half, gave you the larger piece, and winked as if it were a great secret between you. You tasted sugar on your tongue and love in your chest, both fleeting and impossible to separate. That was the last gift you ever received from him. Sometimes you wonder if he knew he was leaving for good, and that bun was his way of saying goodbye. It's strange how that small sweetness outweighs the heaviness of his absence in your memory. The bun, the wink, the powder that clung to your fingers, it's all so ordinary, and yet it's the anchor you carry. You still wonder why love so often shows up in fragments rather than fullness. Why it's a sweet bun one night, and silence for years afterward. Your mother never spoke badly of him, though her silence spoke volumes. When neighbors asked, she'd shrug and say, "He's working," though her hands tightened on whatever she was holding. You grew up understanding that sometimes the truth is too heavy to put into words. And so you learned to carry unspoken things like stones in your pocket, weighty, hidden, always there. Now, when you drift through your own memories, you see your father less as a person and more as an outline. An empty space where a figure should be. A missing puzzle piece you eventually stopped trying to fit. But the echo of his footsteps, the memory of a sugared bun, and the sight of an empty chair, these are details that remain, stitched permanently into the fabric of your story. Hungry nights have a way of etching themselves deeper into memory than the days when the table was full. You remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, tracing the cracks in the tiles while your stomach grumbled louder than the streetcars rattling outside. The sound of hunger is not just a growl, it's a hollow echo, a reminder that your body is waiting for something it may not receive. Your mother tried to make it easier. She would slice bread crusts into thin strips, dipping them in water to soften them, as though that could transform scraps into a meal. Sometimes she rubbed a clove of garlic across the crust, leaving only the faintest taste, but to you it felt like magic. You'd chew slowly, trying to stretch the flavor, but no matter how much you pretended, it never lasted long enough. The detail that stands out most from those nights is the way the room smelled, not of food, but of absence. The sharpness of soap from your mother's hands, the faint smoke from neighbors cooking drifting through the thin walls, and your own corner empty except for the sound of your stomach. It was a smell of longing, a reminder of what you didn't have. Even now, when you walk past a bakery and catch the thick, warm scent of rising bread, a part of you aches, not because you're hungry, but because you remember what it felt like to want and not receive. The human experience here is one that everyone knows in some way, the experience of wanting more than you can have, whether it's food, love, or comfort. That moment when you press your hand against your belly or your heart and whisper silently, "Please, just a little more." Sometimes you and your siblings made a game of it. You'd imagine elaborate meals, describing them in detail until laughter filled the room louder than the growls of hunger. You'd talk about roasted chickens with golden skins, bowls of fruit piled high, cakes that dripped with icing. Your younger brother once declared he could smell the sugar if he closed his eyes tightly enough. And you all leaned in, breathing deeply, pretending the air was thick with sweetness. That game was a trick of survival, a way to remind yourselves that imagination could sometimes soften reality. Your mother, though, didn't play. She would sit quietly, listening, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Once you caught her looking at you with tears caught in her lashes, but she blinked them away before anyone else could notice. She never wanted pity, not even from her children. There's one night that remains sharp in your mind. You were so hungry you couldn't sleep, tossing on the thin mattress until finally you rose and tiptoed into the kitchen. You found a single apple in the cupboard, soft with bruises. You hesitated, knowing it was likely meant for all of you, but the ache in your belly won. You bit into it, juice running down your chin, sweeter than anything you'd tasted in weeks. When you turned, you saw your mother standing in the doorway, watching silently. She didn't scold. She didn't take it from you. She just nodded once, her lips pressed thin, and walked back to bed. That silent permission still lingers like a shadow in your heart. You still wonder if it was forgiveness or surrender. As you grew older, hunger became less physical and more metaphorical. You hungered for belonging, for affection, for the ease you saw in other people's lives. That gnawing emptiness in your stomach turned into a hollowness in your chest, one that no bread or apple could ever fill. And maybe, in a way, that hunger guided your steps more than anything else. The constant need to find something, someone, someplace that would say, "Here, take what you need." And tonight, as you let the memory settle into quiet, you can almost hear that old growl again. But instead of fear or shame, you let it hum like a low reminder. You survived it. The hunger didn't swallow you. You carried it forward, turned it into a kind of strength. Hungry nights have a way of etching themselves deeper into memory than the days when the table was full. You remember sitting cross-legged on the floor, tracing the cracks in the tiles while your stomach grumbled louder than the streetcars rattling outside. The sound of hunger is not just a growl, it's a hollow echo, a reminder that your body is waiting for something it may not receive. Your mother tried to make it easier. She would slice bread crusts into thin strips, dipping them in water to soften them, as though that could transform scraps into a meal. Sometimes she rubbed a clove of garlic across the crust, leaving only the faintest taste, but to you it felt like magic. You chew slowly, trying to stretch the flavor, but no matter how much you pretended, it never lasted long enough. The detail that stands out most from those nights is the way the room smelled, not of food, but of absence. The sharpness of soap from your mother's hands, the faint smoke from neighbors' cooking drifting through the thin walls, and your own corner empty except for the sound of your stomach. It was a smell of longing, a reminder of what you didn't have. Even now, when you walk past a bakery and catch the thick, warm scent of rising bread, a part of you aches not because you're hungry, but because you remember what it felt like to want and not receive. The human experience here is one that everyone knows in some way, the experience of wanting more than you can have, whether it's food, love, or comfort. That moment when you press your hand against your belly or your heart and whisper silently, "Please, just a little more." Sometimes you and your siblings made a game of it. You'd imagine elaborate meals, describing them in detail until laughter filled the room louder than the growls of hunger. You'd talk about roasted chickens with golden skins, bowls of fruit piled high, cakes that dripped with icing. Your younger brother once declared he could smell the sugar if he closed his eyes tightly enough. And you all leaned in, breathing deeply, pretending the air was thick with sweetness. That game was a trick of survival, a way to remind yourselves that imagination could sometimes soften reality. Your mother, though, didn't play. She would sit quietly, listening, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Once you caught her looking at you with tears caught in her lashes, but she blinked them away before anyone else could notice. She never wanted pity, not even from her children. There's one night that remains sharp in your mind. You were so hungry you couldn't sleep, tossing on the thin mattress until finally you rose and tiptoed into the kitchen. You found a single apple in the cupboard, soft with bruises. You hesitated, knowing it was likely meant for all of you, but the ache in your belly won. You bit into it, juice running down your chin, sweeter than anything you'd tasted in weeks. When you turned, you saw your mother standing in the doorway, watching silently. She didn't scold. She didn't take it from you. She just nodded once, her lips pressed thin, and walked back to bed. That silent permission still lingers like a shadow in your heart. You still wonder if it was forgiveness or surrender. As you grew older, hunger became less physical and more metaphorical. You hungered for belonging, for affection, for the ease you saw in other people's lives. That gnawing emptiness in your stomach turned into a hollowness in your chest, one that no bread or apple could ever fill. And maybe, in a way, that hunger guided your steps more than anything else. The constant need to find something, someone, someplace that would say, "Here, take what you need." And tonight, as you let the memory settle into quiet, you can almost hear that old growl again. But instead of fear or shame, you let it hum like a low reminder. You survived it. The hunger didn't swallow you. You carried it forward, turned it into a kind of strength. The first glimpse of glamour came quietly, almost like a secret gift from the night. You were still young enough to be more child than grown, yet old enough to notice details you hadn't before. It happened one evening when you followed the hum of the street, wandering farther than usual. There they were, older girls, standing under the soft glow of a flickering sign, their lips painted red like cherries, their shoes shining with a polish you could smell even from where you stood. You froze, hidden in the corner of a doorway, your heart beating fast as if you were trespassing. They weren't like the women you had seen in passing before. These girls laughed with each other, tossing their hair back, snapping gum, clinking bracelets against each other's wrists. To you it was dazzling. They seemed larger than life, not because of who they were, but because of how they carried themselves, as if the world belonged to them for those few shining hours. The detail that stamped itself into your memory was one girl's lipstick, bright crimson, but smudged just at the corner where she pressed a cigarette. The imperfection made it real. It wasn't a painted doll's mouth, it was human, and somehow that smudge made her even more glamorous to you. Years later, when you first held a tube of lipstick yourself, you remembered that image, the way beauty and flaw could exist in the same breath, and how sometimes the flaw made it unforgettable. You still wonder if what you admired was glamour or simply defiance. Because glamour isn't only about the shine of shoes or the cut of a dress. Sometimes it's the audacity to laugh too loud when the night is heavy, or to lean against a lamppost as if it's your throne. That's what you saw in them, not just beauty, but a kind of courage, even if it was fragile. The human part of this memory is the ache of longing. Everyone, at some point, has stood on the outside of something glittering, watching, wishing. You know that pull, the desire to step closer, to belong, to be noticed. You pressed your palm against the brick wall, feeling the cool stones steady you, as your body leaned toward them without realizing. Your feet wanted to move. Your heart wanted to leap. But you stayed hidden because longing is easier from a distance than it is up close. That night, you went home and stood in front of the mirror, trying to copy the way they laughed, the tilt of their heads, the way their lips curved. You puckered and pouted, then burst into giggles at how silly you looked. Still, you kept practicing, the echo of their glamour alive in your reflection. You traced your lips with your finger, wishing you had that cherry red, wishing you could step into their shoes for just a moment. There was another detail too, the jingle of their bracelets. A sound so light, like bells, cutting through the heavy air of the street. Even now, when you hear bracelets clink together, your chest tightens with memory. It is a sound tied forever to that first glimpse of a world that felt both dangerous and irresistible. You didn't know then what their laughter was hiding, or how heavy their smiles might have been. You only knew that, for a brief moment, you wanted to be like them, to shine under a flickering sign, to wear shoes that clicked confidently against the cobblestones, to paint your mouth in colors that demanded attention. That longing stitched itself into you that night, quietly, like thread pulling through fabric. And as you think back now, you can still feel that pull. That whisper of glamour, fragile and fierce, lingering in the air like smoke from a cigarette, like the faint trace of perfume on a passing stranger. It was the beginning of seeing the streets not just as shadows, but as stages. And you, whether you knew it or not, were already waiting for your cue. Running away once felt like the boldest decision of your young life, though now you see it for what it was, a trial run, a rehearsal for a freedom you weren't ready to carry. You packed a bag so small it could barely hold anything, a cracked comb, 2 pieces of bread wrapped in paper, and a shirt you thought looked grown up. That was all. You tied the bundle with string, holding it tightly as though the weight could convince you of your own bravery. The night was warmer than most. You remember the hum of cicadas, the way the air pressed thick against your skin, carrying the smells of fried food from a street vendor far off. You slipped out quietly, careful not to wake your mother, and let the door click shut behind you. That sound, that tiny click, was louder than you expected. It made your heart race as though the whole world had noticed you leaving. The detail that has stayed with you most vividly is the feel of the shoes on your feet. They were too big, a hand-me-down pair with frayed laces, and you stuffed them with cloth so they wouldn't slip. Each step made a soft flap against the cobblestones, a sound that reminded you with every stride that you were trying on a life not meant for you just yet. You can still hear that flapping when you think of running away, not fast, not graceful, but stubborn, determined. The human experience in this memory is the universal one of testing boundaries. Everyone, in some form, has tried to step outside of what they know, whether it's sneaking out past curfew, trying on clothes that don't fit, or declaring a dream too big for their world. That moment of saying, I can do this on my own, even when you can't, it's something we all carry, tucked like a secret badge of courage. You walked for hours, or what felt like hours, though it was probably less. The city at night revealed itself differently when you weren't looking through a window. The shadows seemed thicker, the voices sharper. Men glanced at you with expressions you didn't understand yet, and women's eyes lingered as if they knew what you were trying to do. You kept your chin high, the way you'd practiced in the mirror, pretending the bundle in your arms made you older. But as the night wore on, the glamour dissolved. The bread in your bag grew stale before you could even eat it, and the streets that had once looked alive from afar now felt endless and cold. You sat down on a step, pulling your knees to your chest, listening to the shuffle of strangers passing without a glance. For the first time, the city didn't feel like a stage. It felt like an ocean, and you were too small to swim. It was the sound of a shopkeeper sweeping the pavement at dawn that broke your courage. He looked at you once, shook his head, and muttered something under his breath. Not cruel, just dismissive, as though you were a stray dog who had wandered too far. That single gesture stripped away your imagined bravery. You gathered your bundle and turned back, the flapping of your shoes slower now, heavier. When you reached home, the door was unlocked. Your mother was sitting in her chair, eyes closed, hands folded in her lap. You thought she might scold, but she didn't. She only opened her eyes, studied you for a long moment, then said softly, "Breakfast is on the table." A single boiled egg, sliced in half, waiting. No questions, no anger, just the quiet acknowledgement that you had tried to leave and returned anyway. That silence felt louder than any lecture could have. You still wonder what she thought that morning, whether she saw in you a restless spirit she couldn't contain, or whether she simply knew you would try again one day. Because running away wasn't failure. It was a glimpse into the truth. You weren't ready yet, but the streets would wait. They always wait. And as you let the memory fade now, you can still taste that egg, the yolk crumbling on your tongue, richer than any meal before. It was both a homecoming and a reminder. Freedom would come, but not that night. Not yet. Your mother's sickness arrived quietly, the way a shadow stretches slowly across a room before you even notice you re-sitting in the dark. At first, it was nothing more than tired sighs, the kind you assumed were from long days of scrubbing clothes and carrying too many burdens. But then the coughs grew sharper, tearing through the nights until you lay awake listening, clutching your blanket like it could muffle the sound. The detail you remember most is the way her hands changed. They had always been strong, quick with a needle or steady over a pot, but soon they trembled when she lifted even a small cup. The veins stood out more clearly, the skin thin as parchment, and sometimes when you tried to hold her hand, it felt like you were holding both strength and fragility at once. That contradiction, the mother who had always seemed unshakable, suddenly faltering, left a mark deeper than anything else. The human ache here is universal. The moment you realize the person you rely on is not invincible. Everyone, in some form, has looked at someone they love and seen time or illness taking its quiet toll. That helpless recognition, the shift from being cared for to becoming the one who worries, is a passage that lingers. You tried to help in small ways. You cooked, though the food was often burnt or bland. You cleaned, though dust still clung stubbornly to the corners. And you sat by her side, reading aloud from old newspapers as if the words could distract her from the coughing. Sometimes she smiled faintly, eyes half closed, and told you your voice was better than the words themselves. You clung to those moments, wishing you could be enough to heal her. The sickness made the house feel smaller. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of herbs steeping endlessly in pots, the bitter steam clinging to the walls. You hated that smell, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was a constant reminder of her weakness. Even today, when you catch the sharpness of boiled herbs, you are pulled back to that room, to the sight of your mother wrapped in blankets too thin to keep out the cold. There was one night in particular that still feels vivid. She was coughing so hard that you thought she might break apart. You ran to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, your hands shaking so badly that it spilled before you reached her. When you pressed it into her palms, she looked up at you, eyes red-rimmed, and whispered, "You're stronger than you know." You didn't feel strong. You felt like a child drowning, but her words sank deep, becoming a thread you would carry forward even when she was gone. You also remember the quiet rituals, the way she still braided her hair each morning, though it was thinner now, strands left behind on the comb. The way she smoothed her blanket 3 times before settling in, a small attempt at order in the chaos of her body failing. Those details, so ordinary, so human, made her sickness even harder to accept. How could someone who still clung to rituals be slipping away? And then one morning, you woke to silence. No cough, no rustle of blankets, just silence. For a moment, hope fluttered. Maybe she was better, maybe the illness had passed. But when you stepped into the room, you found her sitting upright in her chair, eyes closed, her chest rising too slowly. She was still breathing, but each breath seemed borrowed, fragile. You stood there, torn between shaking her awake and letting her rest, not knowing which kindness was greater. She lasted longer than you expected, though every day felt like it might be the last. You learned to move gently, to speak softly, to measure time not in days or weeks, but in breaths. And through it all, you carried the fear and the love side by side, stitched together in a way that could never be untangled. Even now, when you close your eyes, you can feel the texture of her hand in yours, thin, trembling, yet warm. You can hear her voice, soft but steady, telling you that you were stronger than you knew. And you still wonder if, in those moments, she was trying to prepare you for the world she suspected you would face alone. The first offer came on a night when the city seemed to hum louder than usual, as if it sensed a change in your life before you did. You were leaning against a lamppost, the solace of your shoes scuffed from running, waiting for someone or something you didn't name. The air was sharp with the scent of fried food and smoke, and your stomach growled louder than the distant music from a nearby cafe. He appeared suddenly, a man with a soft smile and eyes that seemed to weigh you without judgment. Not frightening, not too familiar, just enough presence to make your pulse quicken. He spoke casually, almost lazily, offering a cigarette first and then words that would shift your world. "You ever think of making your nights easier?" he asked. You tilted your head, unsure whether he meant money, attention, or something else entirely. His question hung between you like smoke curling in the air. The human experience here is subtle yet potent. The moment you recognize opportunity and danger entwined, so closely you can barely tell them apart. Everyone has encountered choices that feel both irresistible and forbidden, and this was yours. You felt curiosity, fear, and excitement coiling together in your chest. That strange cocktail of emotions is something that doesn't fade. It lingers, a lesson in intuition and boundaries. The detail you remember vividly is his watch. A simple leather band, the face catching the dim light just right, ticking steadily. You noticed it because it was the only thing that seemed deliberate about him, the rhythm of it grounding the chaos of the moment. Everything else felt sudden, unpredictable. You still wonder if he wore it as a quiet reassurance to himself, or as a signal that he had measured every step before speaking to you. You asked questions, hesitant, your voice barely rising above the city's hum. He answered with soft clarity, never raising his voice, never demanding. And there it was, the first sense that your presence alone held value. He wasn't just offering work, he was offering recognition, attention, and a kind of exchange that felt complicated but strangely comforting. That complexity is one of the lessons that stays with you. The awareness that transactions can carry layers, even tenderness, and that the human heart often beats beneath the surface of simple words. You remember the moment you nodded, almost imperceptibly, deciding to follow him into a space that smelled faintly of roses and dust. It was a room with curtains too red, furniture too small, a single chair too low. But in that small, awkward space, your life shifted. Every footstep you took felt like a rehearsal for the years to come. The first offer wasn't just an opening. It was an invitation to see yourself differently, to learn how to navigate a world that moved in hushed whispers and careful glances. That night, as you walked back under the streetlights, you carried both fear and fascination. You had taken a first step toward a life that would demand courage you didn't yet know you possessed. And you still wonder sometimes if the choice was truly yours, or if life had simply nudged you forward when you weren't paying attention. The memory lingers, delicate and heavy, like the faint glow of a street lamp at dawn. You can still feel the weight of possibility pressing against your chest, soft but insistent, and you trace the echo of that first offer in the quiet moments when the city sleeps and the night hums around you. The first client arrived like a whisper, a shadow sliding into the room as though it belonged there. You remember the faint scent of tobacco and cologne, mixed with a sharp tang of cleaning supplies that had been scrubbed into the corners earlier that afternoon. You stood by the curtained window, hands fidgeting with the hem of your dress, heart drumming in a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He spoke first, politely, almost hesitantly, as though he too was uncertain of the ritual about to unfold. You learned quickly that the smallest details mattered, how you folded your hands, the way your gaze met his, even the tilt of your head when listening. There was a strange intimacy in it, though not the kind you expected from warmth or affection. It was a connection measured in words and gestures, in the silent negotiation of comfort and distance. The human part of this moment was unmistakable. You were learning the art of reading people, of gauging moods and intentions. of discovering the delicate balance between giving and withholding. That tension is universal. Everyone at some point must learn when to open up and when to protect themselves. You carried that lesson forward in ways that touched every interaction afterward. A detail that still lingers is the way he hesitated before speaking. His hands rested lightly on the armrest, not pressing, not twitching. The pause was almost theatrical, a beat that allowed you to measure his energy, to sense whether the night would be tense, calm, or awkward. You realize now that those moments, the pauses, taught you more than any instruction ever could. They were a guide to intuition, to navigating subtle power and vulnerability. You remember the first small kindness. He complimented the sound of your laugh, a genuine observation that made your chest lighten despite your nerves. You blushed, unsure whether to accept or deflect, and he didn't push. That simple acknowledgement, the recognition of you as more than a role, was a revelation. It was proof that even within transactional spaces, human connection could surface in the smallest ways. Later, when the encounter ended and he left, you were left with a mix of relief and awe. The room felt quieter, the air thick with residual scents, the lingering echo of words and gestures. You traced the curve of your hand along the curtain, memorizing its texture as if it held some secret about the night. And in that quiet, you processed something profound, that you had survived the first test of this life, and that you carried within you the resilience to continue. You still wonder sometimes about that first client. Was he aware of how much you were learning from him, or was he simply another passerby in your story? The uncertainty hangs like a faint perfume in memory, sweet and elusive, shaping the way you approached every encounter that followed. Even now, when you recall that night, there's a softness in your chest, a mix of fear and triumph, of hesitation and discovery. It was the first lesson in the delicate dance you would spend years mastering, balancing presence and protection, longing and restraint, recognition and self-preservation. And it began with a whisper, a pause, and a faint smile that stayed with you long after the door clicked closed. The nights began to blur into one another, a series of muted lights and murmured words that gradually became your rhythm. You learned to recognize the city's heartbeat, the flicker of neon signs, the shuffle of feet on wet pavement, the distant hum of traffic like a lullaby that never stops. It was a rhythm that matched your own, and sometimes you found comfort in the constancy, even when the work itself left you hollow. The detail that clung most vividly was the feel of fabric beneath your fingers. Dresses that were too tight in some places, too loose in others, but always shimmering in the streetlights. You would smooth them down obsessively, the motion almost meditative, reminding yourself that presentation mattered even when your heart felt ragged. Sometimes you caught your reflection in a store window, startled at how grown-up you looked, lips painted, eyes wide, standing alone but trying not to tremble. The human experience of those nights was quiet endurance. Everyone knows what it is to put on a mask, to show the world a version of themselves that is polished and controlled while hiding the storm beneath. You learned to wear composure like armor, even when it itched and scratched against your skin, even when every bone ached to just curl up and disappear. That lesson has stayed with you. The understanding that dignity often survives in the smallest, most careful gestures. You remember one particularly rainy evening. The city smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust, and the neon signs were blurred into streaks of red and blue. You walked slowly, letting raindrops land on your cheeks like cold punctuation marks. A man approached you, polite but insistent, and you felt the familiar tight coil of nerves in your stomach. Yet beneath that coil, there was also a strange thrill, proof that you could navigate these encounters, that you could exist in spaces others feared to enter. There was a fleeting moment of levity, too. A street cat darted between the legs of passers-by, yowling in the rain. You laughed quietly, more at the absurdity than the cat itself, and for a heartbeat, The tension in your shoulders eased. That small human laughter reminded you that you were still capable of delight, even when the night demanded vigilance. You still remember how your shoes squished against puddles, how water seeped into the edges, yet you felt alive in a way that was uniquely yours. Through it all, you learned the delicate balance of intimacy and distance. Each client, each encounter, required reading subtle cues, understanding boundaries, and maintaining control over your own vulnerability. You mastered the art of listening, of noticing how a flick of an eye or a slight shift in posture could guide your response. Those skills weren't just for survival. They became a map of human behavior, a guide to navigating a world that was unpredictable and often unforgiving. And yet, there was a constant undercurrent of questioning. You wondered if your resilience would ever falter, if the streets would one day become too heavy to carry. You questioned what you were trading, what you were learning, and what you might lose along the way. But in those quiet reflections, you also found strength, the understanding that endurance could coexist with tenderness, that survival did not mean the absence of feeling. The nights continued, each one layered atop the last, a complex tapestry of lights, rain, fabric, and fleeting smiles. And as you look back now, you realize that these blurred nights were also the hours in which you were becoming yourself, slowly, quietly, beneath the city's unending hum. You learned early that trust was fragile, a fragile bird that could vanish if you moved too quickly. There were moments when a client's kindness caught you off guard, a soft word, a careful question, the gentle way he adjusted a chair so you could sit comfortably. Those gestures were rare, but they left impressions that lingered long after the door clicked shut. You carried them in your chest, a quiet reminder that human warmth could appear even in the most transactional spaces. The detail you remember clearly is the way one man folded his hands on the table, fingers entwined, while listening to your hesitant words. There was patience in that gesture, a softness that contrasted with the sharp edges of the world outside. You found yourself relaxing into it without realizing, letting your shoulders drop, letting your voice tremble and rise naturally. It was an intimacy measured not in touch, but in attentiveness, and it taught you that connection could exist in subtle, almost invisible forms. The human experience here is learning to read the invisible language of others. Everyone encounters it in life, the subtle cues, the tiny gestures that convey trust, caution, curiosity, or affection. You had to learn it fast because misunderstanding could make the night heavier, more tense, or simply unsafe. Yet there was also a beauty in the practice, a kind of art in noticing and responding to these silent conversations. You remember one evening vividly. The room was bathed in a soft amber glow from the bedside lamp, the curtains drawn against the city. He asked you about your childhood, and for a moment you hesitated, wondering how much you could reveal. Then you spoke softly at first about your mother's hands, about the cracked tiles you once sat on, about the hunger you had learned to ignore. He listened without interruption, nodding gently, his eyes never leaving yours. You felt heard in a way that was rare, and it stayed with you long after he left. There was also a touch of humor that night. He tried to pronounce the name of a street from your past, twisting the syllables in a way that made you laugh quietly into your palm. The sound of your laughter felt strange in that quiet room, yet liberating. For a fleeting moment, you were not merely a girl navigating the night. You were simply human, capable of laughter, memory, and connection. That night, you realized something essential. Intimacy is not only physical, nor is it only spoken. Sometimes it lives in the way attention is given, in the gentle noticing of small details, in the patient endurance of silence. And you carried that lesson forward, letting it shape the way you moved through the world, through clients, through strangers, through fleeting encounters that could feel either empty or unexpectedly rich. You still wonder now, years later, whether that evening was a gift from the world, or merely a moment of clarity amidst chaos. Perhaps it was both. But either way, it became a marker, a proof that even in the midst of survival, tenderness can slip in, quiet and unassuming, leaving its imprint on the heart. Friendship arrived unexpectedly, in the form of another girl who leaned against the same lamppost you had claimed as your own. Her name was Layla, and she had a way of moving through the streets that made the night feel less heavy, as though she carried a lantern in her chest. You noticed her first by the click of her boots against wet pavement, the confidence in her stride that you envied and admired. The detail you remember most vividly is the way she flipped her hair back when she laughed, tossing a lock across her shoulder like it belonged to the moonlight rather than her head. That small gesture drew your attention and never let go. You realized quickly that friendship in your world wasn't about idle chatter. It was about noticing these tiny flourishes, understanding the rhythm of someone else's presence, and knowing you could exist alongside them without pretense. The human experience here is companionship, the subtle reassurance of not being entirely alone. Even amidst chaos and uncertainty, the presence of someone who sees you, truly sees you, can ease the burdens you carry. It was a lesson that transcends context. Everyone needs someone to walk beside them, even for a few blocks or a few hours of conversation. Layla taught you little tricks for survival, things that no one else explained. How to avoid unwanted attention from certain streets, which cafes offered warmth without scrutiny, how to make a coat feel heavier than it actually was, so it could hide small items in pockets. But more importantly, she taught you laughter. Her humor was sharp, quick, and unexpected, like fireworks against the night sky. You laughed until your ribs ached, and for a moment you forgot the hunger, the fear, the endless calculations of caution. There was a night that remains etched in your memory. The two of you hid in the corner of a cafe, sharing a single slice of cake and pretending it was a banquet. Layla told stories of her own childhood, of streets that smelled of oranges and music, of mothers and fathers who sometimes stayed, sometimes left. You listened, your fingers tracing the crumbs on the table, your heart both heavy and light, learning that stories could be shared without judgment. Even after laughter faded, there were lessons carried quietly between you. You discovered how trust could be measured not in grand declarations, but in small agreements. The nod that meant, "I've got your back." The glance that said, "Be careful." The shared silence that conveyed safety. Friendship became a secret language, a code to navigate a world that demanded constant vigilance. You still wonder if you could have survived without her. Perhaps you would have, but the nights would have been longer, the streets colder. Lila's presence was like a stitch holding a fraying garment together, a small, bright thread that kept you from unraveling completely. And as you remember those nights now, the sound of her laughter and the weight of her presence settled gently into your chest. It is proof that even in the harshest of worlds, companionship can bloom quietly, consistently, like a single flower breaking through cracked pavement. The first time you earned more than you expected, it felt like the world had opened just a fraction, enough to let a sliver of light touch the shadowed corners of your life. You walked home that night with coins heavy in your pocket, clinking softly against each other as if celebrating their arrival. The sound was strange, new, and entirely yours. You pressed your hand against the small bundle, feeling the weight not only of metal but of possibility. The detail that stays with you is the texture of the pavement beneath your shoes, wet from a drizzle that made the street glow under the lamplight. Every step was punctuated by the soft slap of leather, and with each step, a small joy expanded quietly in your chest. You weren't rich, not by any measure, but you could taste independence in the simple act of moving through the night with coins you de-earned yourself. The human experience here is the thrill of self-sufficiency. Everyone remembers that first moment of realizing that their labor, their effort, has tangible worth. That satisfaction, the proof that you can navigate the world and claim a small portion of it for yourself, is unforgettable. You carried that pride quietly, like a secret jewel in your pocket, safe from the world's judgment. You remember pausing halfway home to stand under a street lamp and just breathe. The rain had stopped, leaving a faint mist, and the city seemed to exhale alongside you. You counted the coins again, one by one, just to be sure, and the numbers felt like magic. Each coin represented a choice made, a night survived, a lesson learned. The realization that your body and mind could produce value in ways you hadn't imagined was dizzying and grounding all at once. That night, you allowed yourself a small indulgence, a slice of bread slathered with butter from the corner shop, eaten slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every crumb might stretch it into a feast. You closed your eyes, tasting the richness, feeling warmth creep into your fingers and toes, and for a moment, the hunger of past years softened. That bread wasn't just food, it was affirmation, a tangible proof that you could carve small sanctuaries of comfort from the world around you. Later, at home, you counted your coins again, arranging them in neat lines on the table. You imagined what you could do with them: a new pair of shoes, a book to read, a little treat for your mother. The coins were more than money. They were possibility incarnate. You still wonder how something so small could feel so monumental, yet it did. That night marked the first time you understood that survival and ambition could coexist, that joy could exist even in a life layered with hardship. And as you drifted into sleep later, the clink of the coins in your pocket seemed to echo softly in your dreams. It was a lullaby of independence, a gentle reminder that even in darkness, you had carved a space for yourself, a place where your choices mattered. That feeling of agency, fragile and luminous, stayed with you for years to come, shaping the way you walked, laughed, and dreamed. The first apartment you rented was nothing like the glamour you once glimpsed under the neon signs, but it felt like a kingdom all the same. The walls were scuffed, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the bathroom smelled faintly of mildew. Yet you unlocked the door for the first time and breathed as if the air itself had shifted. You had arrived somewhere that belonged solely to you. The detail that clung most vividly was the kitchen counter. A simple slab of wood, scarred by knives and heat, yet it became your altar. You arranged your few possessions there: mismatched mugs, a small tin of tea, the bread you brought home each week, and each item felt like a claim staked in the world. That counter was where you planned meals, where you rehearsed dreams, where you felt, for a few precious hours, untethered from the streets. The human experience here is the sense of ownership, of establishing a private world. Everyone craves a space that is solely their own, a place where routines, scents, and light are chosen rather than imposed. You discovered that even the simplest room could feel vast when it carried your name, your choices, your rhythm. You remember the first night alone, lying on the thin mattress with the window cracked to let in the summer breeze. The city murmured softly outside, but inside, you felt the thrill of autonomy, the quiet satisfaction of doors locked and curtains drawn. You poured a cup of tea, the warmth seeping into your hands, and traced your fingers along the condensation gathering on the mug. The ordinary act of making tea became sacred in that silence, a meditation, a small ritual that belonged entirely to you. There were small, unexpected joys. The way sunlight crept through the curtains in the morning, falling on the edge of the bed like a spotlight. The scratch of your shoes on the floor as you moved between rooms. The smell of simmering water for tea, mingling with the faint dust of the apartment, creating a scent that was uniquely yours. These details were markers of life reclaimed, tiny proofs that the world could be soft and yours at once. But alongside the comfort, there was a quiet unease. The streets had always provided a rhythm, a pulse you had learned to read. Now, without constant movement, you noticed the stillness, the echoes of your own breath, and for a brief moment, the weight of solitude pressed down. Yet that too became a teacher. You learned to inhabit silence without fear, to find company in your own thoughts. and to recognize that independence often asks for patience, reflection, and acceptance. And when night fell, you lay on that thin mattress, listening to the faint hum of the city and the whisper of your own heartbeat, feeling a cautious triumph. The apartment was small, unremarkable to anyone else, but it was yours. And in that ownership, you discovered a new kind of freedom, the freedom to exist fully, to make mistakes and learn quietly, to live in a world that responded to no one but you. The first real friendship with a client arrived like a secret sunrise, slow and unexpected. He wasn't like the others, no abrupt demands, no rehearsed politeness. Instead, he lingered in the quiet corners of conversation, listening in a way that made you feel seen rather than performed for. You noticed the way his eyes softened when you spoke, the slight tilt of his head, the gentle cadence of his voice that seemed to let you breathe for a moment. The detail you remember most vividly is the scarf he always wore, loosely draped around his neck, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. It became a signal to you, a mark of comfort in a world that rarely offered any. Just knowing he would appear with that scarf, waiting without expectation, brought a warmth you hadn't recognized you craved. It was the human touch of attention, entirely non-physical, entirely rare. The human experience here is trust in small doses. Everyone, at some point, discovers that connection doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it emerges from steady presence, quiet attentiveness, the simple act of listening and acknowledging without judgment. That realization shaped the way you approached the world, teaching you to notice subtleties and to value the rare kindnesses that pass most people by. You remember your first conversation that stretched beyond the surface. You spoke of childhood memories, of streets that smelled of spices and laundry, of nights when hunger pressed in like a constant companion. He listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never prying. The pause between your words was a safety net. You felt free to reveal more than you had intended, feeling a small but undeniable relief in speaking to someone who understood restraint and space. There was laughter too. Small, quiet laughter that punctuated stories, a counterbalance to the heaviness that often followed you home. You found yourself smiling without effort, the sound of it almost foreign in a room where your voice had previously been measured, performed, calculated. That brief spontaneity was liberating, a gentle rebellion against the meticulous control your work demanded. And then, the inevitable moment came when he left, and the silence returned. But you carried a fragment of that evening in your chest, a reminder that even in a life threaded with transaction, genuine human connection could slip through, delicate and fleeting. You still wonder if you realized the weight of that exchange, or if it was simply another ordinary night to him. For you, however, it became a quiet anchor, a proof that compassion could exist even where it was least expected. The memory of him lingers, like the faint scent of cedar on a scarf long after it's been folded away. You trace it often, softly, in moments of solitude, grateful for a fleeting glimpse of trust and tenderness that made the world feel just a little less lonely. The first time you faced betrayal, it arrived in the form of whispered rumors and sideways glances. Someone you trusted, a colleague, a friend, a sister of circumstance, had spoken carelessly of you, revealing details you thought were private. You learned quickly that the streets carried their own language, one that spread faster than the wind, twisting every word into shapes you couldn't always recognize. The detail that burned into memory was the tilt of her head, the casual shrug she gave when you confronted her. It wasn't malice, not exactly, just a flicker of thoughtlessness that cut deeper than intention. You felt your chest tighten, your stomach twist into knots, a strange mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. It was a lesson in human fragility. Sometimes people fail you not because they want to, but because they are too small to contain the care you expected. The human experience here is heartbreak mingled with disillusionment. Everyone knows the sting of realizing someone you relied on cannot protect or honor your trust. It's a moment that shapes the way you walk through relationships afterward, teaching caution without extinguishing the possibility of hope. You learn to protect yourself quietly, to measure trust more carefully, but also to recognize that vulnerability was not weakness. It was a choice that sometimes demanded resilience. You remember pacing the narrow hallway of your apartment, fingers tracing the chipped paint along the wall. The coins from your recent earnings sat on the counter, ordinary, neutral, yet they felt heavier that night, as if bearing the weight of disappointment. You traced the outline of each one, counting, recounting, grounding yourself against the ache of betrayal. The physical act of touching something solid reminded you that some things could be trusted. The world, at least in part, could be contained in hands and fingers, in tactile proof of existence. There was a small moment of self-reflection, too. You wondered how you might have misjudged her, how your hope for shared humanity had outpaced her capacity for care. You realized that expectation, even gentle and well-meaning, can sometimes lead to pain. That understanding didn't harden you immediately, but it taught a subtle vigilance, that kindness must always be paired with discernment. And yet, in that same night, you recognized your own growth. You had survived. The rumor, the betrayal, the pang of disappointment, all were heavy, but none crushed you. You had seen deception before, and you had endured. You sat down finally, drawing a slow breath, and let the quiet seep in. The city hummed beyond your window, indifferent yet oddly comforting, a reminder that life moves onward regardless of missteps or misjudgments. You still carry that lesson gently, like a scar that neither burns nor itches, but reminds you of resilience. Trust is fragile, yes, but you have learned that even when it breaks, you can rebuild, stitch by careful stitch, piece by piece, stronger than before. You stopped often, letting the sound echo briefly, as if your apartment itself had to approve your presence. The intimacy of that quiet, punctuated by small noises, felt almost sacred, a gentle affirmation that solitude could also be comfort. The human experience here is discovering the nuanced freedom of being alone. The steam curled upward, brushing your cheeks like a soft caress. That laughter filled the room in a way that felt healing, like the walls themselves absorbed the joy, reinforcing your claim to this solitary space. You noticed tiny details in the apartment that had previously gone unremarked: the chipped paint on the doorframe, the way sunlight hit the edge of the counter at dawn, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Each imperfection, each mundane sound became part of your sense of belonging. And as night deepened, you lay on your mattress, listening to the city breathing beyond the curtains. The first time you earned enough to buy something purely for pleasure, it was a small, delicate victory. You chose a book, its cover soft under your fingers, the pages thick and fragrant with ink and possibility. You had read many borrowed scraps and worn pages, but this one was yours, acquired with the quiet power of independence and effort. The moment you held it, you felt a flutter of triumph, a subtle reminder that the world could offer gifts beyond mere survival. The detail you remember most vividly is the weight of the book in your hands. It rested comfortably, a presence you could control, unlike the unpredictable world outside. You traced your fingers along the spine, imagining the stories contained within, the lives and voices waiting patiently to meet you. That tactile sensation became a symbol of choice, a tangible mark that your effort had translated into something meaningful beyond the necessity of coins and chores. The human experience here is delight in ownership, the quiet joy of claiming a small pleasure for oneself. Everyone remembers their first indulgence, the first item purchased not out of need but desire. That sense of agency, however modest, brings a gentle confidence, a proof that your labor has value, that your choices matter, and that you are allowed to seek enjoyment even amid hardship. You spent hours that night nestled against the window ledge, reading under the soft lamplight, letting the world blur outside. The pages smelled faintly of paper and ink, grounding you in a comforting ritual. Each word you read felt like a soft embrace, a temporary escape, a gentle reshaping of your inner landscape. The sounds of the city faded to a distant murmur, replaced by the rhythm of sentences and stories that belonged only to you. There was also a small human amusement. You laughed softly at the protagonist's quirks, the odd turns of plot, and the tiny ironies scattered like breadcrumbs across the chapters. It was laughter unprompted by performance, unmeasured by anyone else's expectations, pure and private. That kind of joy was foreign, yet intoxicating, a secret layer of life that you hadn't realized you were missing. Later, as you closed the book and set it carefully on the counter, you traced its edges once more, reverently. You felt a sense of quiet pride, not for extravagance, not for display, but for the simple proof that you could choose, could desire, and could satisfy that desire on your own terms. It was a lesson in agency and delight, a reminder that pleasure could coexist with responsibility, that even the smallest indulgence could carry profound meaning. And as sleep approached, you curled under your thin blanket, the book resting beside you, a soft companion in the quiet. That night you understood that survival and joy are not mutually exclusive, and that even in a life threaded with struggle, moments of pure delight can be claimed, held, and treasured. The first time you felt truly recognized for your work, it arrived not through words, but a gesture. A client, unusually attentive, handed you a small note instead of coins, carefully folded, written in neat, deliberate script. You hesitated before opening it, heart thumping like a secret drum, unsure whether gratitude, admiration, or something else awaited inside. The moment you unfolded the paper, the words whispered a quiet acknowledgement. You are seen. You matter. The detail that lingers is the texture of the note itself, the weight of the paper, the slight roughness of its fibers under your fingertips, the faint scent of ink still wet from its journey. Every crease felt intentional, every letter deliberate. You traced each word with your finger, feeling them imprint onto your skin, onto your memory. It was the kind of human recognition that surpasses verbal praise, that lingers because it touches the parts of you no one else can reach. The human experience here is acknowledgement. Everyone craves to be seen, understood, and valued. Recognition, especially when it comes unexpectedly, validates not just effort, but existence. That simple act of notice became a quiet revolution in your heart, a reminder that your presence mattered even in spaces where performance and survival often overshadowed individuality. You remember sitting by the window, the note balanced in your lap, and letting the city stretch out beneath you. Streetlights flickered on wet pavement, cars moved with indifferent precision, and the hum of distant conversations formed a gentle backdrop. In that ordinary world, the extraordinary act of being noticed felt sacred. You ran your fingers over the folded corners, rereading the words slowly, letting their weight settle. There was a small, tender shift in emotion. Pride mingled with relief, and a subtle warmth blossomed in your chest. For the first time, you realized that acknowledgement could transform routine labor into something deeply meaningful. You could perform your duties, navigate the streets, manage expectations, and still be recognized as a person, not just a role. That insight stayed with you, quietly shaping the way you navigated subsequent encounters. Even later, when the client had gone and the note sat untouched on your counter, you returned to it repeatedly, tracing the letters with reverence. You imagined the hands that had written it, the thoughtfulness behind each stroke, and the intention to reach across the transactional boundary to speak to your humanity. That memory became a small talisman, proof that even fleeting gestures can leave lasting imprints. And as you lay down that night, the note tucked safely into a drawer, you felt a rare sense of calm and affirmation. The world could still be harsh, unpredictable, and transactional, but you had been seen, and that quiet acknowledgement carried you through the shadows with a gentle, persistent light. The first time you risked speaking your mind to someone, it was both terrifying and exhilarating. You had grown accustomed to silence, to careful nods, to words measured like currency, but that night, something inside you shifted. You found yourself articulating a thought, a boundary, a feeling you had kept tucked away for months. And the act felt like stepping onto a ledge, knowing the fall could be swift. The detail you remember vividly is the tremor in your hands as you gestured slightly, unconsciously, while speaking. It wasn't weakness, it was proof of life, of courage and motion. You traced the veins running across your wrist with the back of your other hand, grounding yourself in the sensation, reminding yourself that you existed and had the right to voice your truth. The subtle physicality of that moment etched itself into your memory, a proof that bravery can be quiet yet unmistakable. The human experience here is courage, the small but profound act of asserting oneself. Everyone, at some point, must risk vulnerability to express needs or opinions. It is frightening, humbling, and necessary, a moment of self-recognition that strengthens the soul, even when outcomes remain uncertain. You discovered that your voice could carry weight without being loud, that respect could be commanded through clarity and calm, and that personal agency is often found in these fleeting, intentional declarations. You remember the pause afterward, that breathless space where neither of you spoke, where words hung like fragile glass between you. The other person's expression softened, a slight nod, a subtle exhale that acknowledged your courage. That moment of acknowledgement, brief yet profound, allowed you to exhale fully, to release tension you hadn't realized had built up over countless nights of compliance and caution. There was also a flicker of amusement, quiet and private, at how absurdly nervous you had been. Your heart hammered, your stomach twisted, and yet the response you received was calm, ordinary, almost mundane. The contrast between your internal storm and the external calm reinforced a lesson. Fear often exaggerates outcomes, while taking action, however shaky, leads to growth. Later, alone in your apartment, you replayed the interaction, noticing nuances, the tilt of their head, the softening of their eyes, the slight relaxation of their shoulders. You smiled quietly, tracing the invisible path between your courage and their recognition. That night, you understood a deeper truth. Speaking up is not just about confrontation. It is about claiming space, asserting presence, and honoring one's own humanity. And as sleep approached, you rested with a sense of quiet pride. The risk had been worth it. Your voice, small but steady, had woven itself into the night, leaving a faint but lasting echo that would remind you, again and again, of your capacity to claim your place in the world. The first time you allowed yourself to dream beyond survival, it arrived as a quiet whisper in the middle of a long night. You were curled on your thin mattress, the hum of the city outside lulling you into a fragile sense of peace, when a thought drifted in. What if there was more than merely getting through each day? What if there were moments of beauty, adventure, or growth waiting for you, just beyond the edges of your current life? The detail that anchors this memory is the tiny sketchbook you had bought with some leftover coins. Its pages were blank, smooth, and untouched, a promise in miniature. You ran your fingers over the paper, imagining the drawings, the scribbles, the words you might fill them with. That sensation, soft, hopeful, and slightly trembling, felt like holding the possibility of the future in your hands. The human experience here is hope, the fragile, flickering desire that sustains us even in darkness. Everyone has glimpsed it, the thought that life could be more than the present moment, that the heart can stretch toward unseen horizons. That night, you learned to cradle hope without shame, to see it as nourishment rather than frivolity, a secret comfort tucked quietly into your chest. You remember tracing imaginary paths across the sketchbook, sketching lines and shapes that had no form yet, imagining stories of streets far from your own, of laughter not born of necessity, of friendships untouched by fear. Each stroke of your finger was a tiny rebellion against circumstance, a claim that your imagination could not be restricted by the narrowness of your current world. There was a soft chuckle, too, when you realized how ridiculous some of your ideas seemed. Drawing rooftops in Paris, sketching cafes that smelled of pastries and coffee, imagining yourself somewhere warm and distant. But the laughter was comforting, a gentle acknowledgement that even absurdity has a place in hope, and that even dreams born of scarcity carry their own richness. Later, as you lay back on the mattress, you felt a faint stirring in your chest, a mingling of excitement and fear. You understood, perhaps for the first time, that life could be layered, that survival and aspiration could coexist. And though you knew reality could be harsh, you also realized that nurturing dreams did not weaken you. It made your nights, your labor, and your solitude more bearable, or human. And so, as the city's hum deepened and night stretched onward, you allowed yourself to linger in possibility, imagining a life where small joys and quiet triumphs could be claimed deliberately, tenderly, and unapologetically. That night, hope became a companion, as real and present as the thin mattress beneath you and the soft glow of the lamp by your side. The first time you felt a spark of pride in your body, it came unexpectedly. Years of running, of careful posture, of performing roles that demanded both attention and restraint, had left you disconnected from the vessel that carried you through every night. But that evening, standing in the dim light of your apartment, you noticed the curve of your shoulders, the subtle strength in your arms, and the way your legs moved with quiet grace. The detail that lingers is the stretch of muscles in your calves as you reached for a cup on the counter. It was a small, ordinary motion, yet you marveled at the way your body responded, at the quiet efficiency that came from countless nights of endurance and movement. You traced your hand along your arm, feeling the familiar warmth, and realized for the first time that your body had its own history, its own story of survival, entirely independent of your mind or your work. The human experience here is self-recognition and pride. Everyone, at some point, glimpses the strength they carry, the resilience embedded in their flesh and sinew, often unnoticed until a quiet moment illuminates it. That evening, you understood that pride need not be loud or boastful. It could exist as a subtle, private acknowledgement of capacity, a gentle pat on the back from one's own soul. You remember standing near the window, the city bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and rolling your shoulders slowly, savoring the sensation of movement unbound by obligation. There was a faint smell of tea, still steeping in its mug, and the soft hum of distant traffic. You closed your eyes briefly, letting awareness ripple from your fingertips to your toes, noting the quiet power you carried with every breath. A small, almost humorous thought drifted in. You wondered how many people walked by without noticing the subtle strength in their own bodies, the quiet resilience beneath everyday motions. It made you smile softly, the kind of private, indulgent smile reserved for small revelations that feel both absurd and profound. Later, you caught your reflection in a narrow mirror, noting the slight tilt of your head, the softness around your jaw, and the subtle confidence radiating from your posture. Pride, you realized, was not an external applause, but an internal recognition of worth, of the countless small victories that had carried you to that night. And as sleep approached, you lay back on your mattress, feeling the rhythm of your heart and the gentle weight of your limbs. That evening marked a subtle yet enduring awakening, the acknowledgement that your body, like your spirit, had endured, adapted, and quietly thrived. You carried that awareness forward, a soft pulse of self-respect that lingered long after the night dissolved into morning. The first time you experienced genuine laughter with someone you barely knew felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. It wasn't calculated or prompted by circumstance. It was spontaneous, shared in a quiet cafe where the world seemed to pause just long enough for joy to slip in. You noticed how contagious it was, how the simple act of laughter could bridge distance, soften edges, and create an invisible bond between two imperfect strangers. The detail that remains is the way her hand covered her mouth when she laughed, fingers trembling slightly, and how the corners of her eyes crinkled with delight. You laughed alongside her, letting your own voice echo without restraint, feeling a warmth spread through your chest. That moment became a quiet affirmation. Happiness, however fleeting, was possible, even in lives layered with complexity and careful calculation. The human experience here is the pure relief of shared joy. Everyone, at some point, recognizes the unique magic of laughter that comes not from comedy, but from presence and connection. It doesn't erase pain or struggle, but it illuminates the spaces between, offering a glimpse of what it means to be alive fully, even amidst uncertainty. You remember sitting across from her, the aroma of coffee mingling with the faint scent of pastries, and the way the light caught the steam curling from your cups. Every detail felt amplified, the warmth of your hands on the mug, the soft clink of spoons against porcelain, the faint hum of conversations around you. The ordinary became extraordinary simply because you were present to it, because joy had slipped in quietly and refused to be ignored. There was a small human reflection that followed, the recognition that moments like this were rare but precious. They reminded you that life wasn't solely about endurance, transactions, or survival. It could be about shared smiles, the subtle pressure of another's presence, the rhythm of laughter bouncing between two people who didn't need history to enjoy the now. Later, when the cafe emptied and the streets outside shimmered under a soft drizzle, you walked home with an unfamiliar lightness in your step. You replayed snippets of conversation, tiny jokes, and shared observations, letting them echo softly in your mind. That night, you understood that laughter is both fragile and powerful, a quiet rebellion against hardship, a signal that life, no matter how challenging, still contains moments of effortless grace. And as sleep drew near, you lay on your mattress, the soft memory of shared laughter warming your chest. It was a gentle reminder that happiness could sneak in quietly, unexpectedly, and that even small moments of joy have the power to ripple through the nights that follow. The first time you felt the weight of nostalgia, it arrived unexpectedly, triggered by the scent of rain on asphalt as you walked home. The memory of your childhood streets came rushing back, the cracked sidewalks, the sound of laughter echoing through alleys, the smell of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery. For a moment, the years folded over themselves, and you were both the child and the woman who had survived nights and streets, standing in the present while carrying the past. The detail that lingers is the way your fingers brushed against the wet railings of a stairwell, tracing the cold metal and feeling the texture as if it were a bridge to those long-lost days. The memory of small hands gripping similar rails, balancing carefully while laughing with friends, created a bittersweet warmth in your chest. That tactile connection became a channel, a reminder that time stretches across decades, weaving experience, loss, and joy into a single thread. The human experience here is longing, the ache for what was once familiar, for innocence, for simpler moments that seem impossibly distant. Everyone feels it, the tug of memory that reminds you of who you were before life layered its complexities upon you. That night, nostalgia was both comforting and aching, a quiet meditation on survival, growth, and the passage of time. You remember pausing at the corner of an empty street, letting the rain fall lightly on your hair, closing your eyes and inhaling deeply. Sounds of the city blurred together, forming a soft, rhythmic background like a lullaby. You thought about your younger self, how naive, curious, and unprotected she had been, and how far you had come. Despite hardship, you had endured, learned, and even carved moments of joy along the way. There was a subtle, almost humorous reflection, too, on how the little things from your past, the smell of a bakery, the squeak of a bicycle, the way sunlight hit a window at noon, had etched themselves permanently into your heart. Those trivial memories now carried an extraordinary weight, proof that beauty and resilience often reside in the smallest details of life. Later, as you reached your apartment and peeled off wet layers, you set down your bag and glanced at the window. The city shimmered faintly under streetlights, but inside, the quiet warmth of recollection wrapped around you. You realized that nostalgia is not just longing. It's acknowledgement, a gentle way to honor where you've been while continuing toward where you are going. And as sleep approached, you let your mind drift through past and present, allowing both grief and joy to mingle softly. The night carried a gentle weight, a lullaby of memory that reminded you that even amid survival and struggle, the past remains a quiet companion, shaping the rhythm of your heart and the way you greet tomorrow. The first time you let yourself cry freely, without holding back, it arrived unexpectedly in the stillness of your apartment. The night had been long, filled with small frustrations, fleeting fears, and unspoken worries that had been tucked carefully into corners of your mind. And then, without warning, a single thought, fragile, honest, broke through, and the tears followed, hot and unstoppable. The detail that lingers is the warmth of the blanket around your shoulders, the way it absorbed your shaking like a soft, forgiving cocoon. You pressed your palms against your face, feeling the moisture against your skin, and the release was both raw and strangely comforting. The physical act of crying, once suppressed and measured, became a gentle ritual of self-recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of everything you had endured and everything you still carried within. The human experience here is vulnerability, the permission to let your emotions move freely, unpolished, uncontained. Everyone reaches moments when restraint can no longer hold, when tears speak the words the mind cannot. That night, vulnerability was not weakness. It was proof that you were fully human, that the years of endurance had layered complexity atop your resilience, and that acknowledging pain could coexist with strength. You remember the small sounds of the city outside your window, muffled yet constant, forming a backdrop to your solitude. Each drop of rain or distant horn became a rhythm for your release, a soft accompaniment to the ebb and flow of emotion. You didn't hurry, didn't judge yourself, just let the tears flow, tracing memories of joy, heartbreak, struggle, and fleeting triumphs in equal measure. There was a subtle flicker of humor that crept in at one point, quiet and private, as you recalled a clumsy mistake from earlier in the week that would normally have frustrated you. Even in the midst of tears, laughter found its way in, proof that human emotion is rarely singular. It bends and twists, blends grief and amusement, sorrow and relief. Later, lying on the mattress, your body lightened with each exhale, your mind quieter than it had been in weeks. You realize that release is not only cleansing but vital, a reminder that emotional survival is just as important as physical endurance. The tears left traces, but they also left space, a gentle clarity, a soft room in your chest to breathe again. And as sleep approached, you let the quiet hum of the city cradle you. The release had been total, a lullaby of vulnerability and relief, teaching you that tears are not surrender. They are proof of life, proof of feeling, and proof that even amid hardship, your heart remains fully capable of expression. The first time you felt a quiet sense of accomplishment in your routine, it came wrapped in small, almost invisible victories. You had spent weeks mastering the art of timing, knowing exactly when to walk certain streets, when to pause for a moment in light or shadow, how to navigate the ebb and flow of the city without drawing unnecessary attention. That evening, as you moved through your neighborhood with practiced ease, a calm satisfaction settled in your chest, a recognition that your careful work, your persistence, had paid off. The detail that stays with you is the subtle rhythm of your footsteps against the pavement. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like a metronome keeping time with your heartbeat. You noticed the way the cool night air brushed against your skin, the faint scent of rain lingering on the asphalt, and the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows. It was ordinary, mundane even, yet each element of the night reinforced the feeling of competence and self-assurance. The human experience here is mastery, the quiet pride that comes from navigating complexity with skill. Everyone experiences moments when routine becomes art, when repetition breeds confidence, when the smallest gestures carry significance. That night, you discovered that competence itself can be a source of comfort, a soft glow of reassurance in an otherwise unpredictable world. You remember pausing briefly under a familiar lamppost, letting the light illuminate your features as you took a deep breath. The city hummed softly around you, but for a moment, it seemed to defer to your presence. You traced the lines of the pavement with your gaze, marveling at the way small adjustments, choices, attentiveness, observation had allowed you to claim this space safely and efficiently. There was a quiet amusement, too, in recognizing how far you had come. The girl who once stumbled through streets, unsure of shadows and strangers, now moved with a calculated grace, aware of dangers and delights alike. That contrast between past and present created a gentle satisfaction, a reminder that growth is often invisible until reflected upon in still moments. Later, as you returned to your apartment, you arranged your small belongings with precision, taking pleasure in the simple order and control over your surroundings. The night had been ordinary, yet it carried weight, a testament to your patience, skill, and resilience. You allowed yourself a small, private smile, knowing that success does not always need applause. Sometimes it is enough to feel it quietly, internally, like a pulse of light in your chest. And as sleep approached, you lay down on your mattress with a sense of quiet accomplishment, letting the steady rhythm of your breath echo the rhythm of your steps. That night, mastery and routine became a gentle lullaby, a soft affirmation of your presence, agency, and enduring resilience. The first time you experienced compassion from an unexpected source, it arrived like a soft knock at the door of your heart. You had grown used to fleeting kindnesses that were transactional, calculated or brief, but this time it came without expectation. A neighbor, someone you barely knew, offered you a warm bowl of soup after noticing you return home late and shivering from the cold. The gesture was simple, unremarkable to anyone else, yet for you, it was profound. The detail that lingers is the gentle steam rising from the bowl, curling toward your face with the faint scent of herbs and warmth. You cupped the bowl in your hands, feeling the heat seep into your fingers, and for a moment, the city's cold edges softened. That warmth extended beyond the physical. It touched a part of you that had grown weary of care, reminding you that compassion can arrive quietly, without fanfare in the small spaces of ordinary life. The human experience here is the comforting power of empathy. Everyone remembers the moments when another's consideration, however modest, penetrates barriers built over years of self-reliance and caution. Compassion doesn't always change circumstances, but it shifts perception, offering reassurance that you are not entirely alone in navigating life's hardships. You remember sitting at your table, the soup steaming in front of you, savoring each spoonful slowly, letting warmth radiate through your chest. You noticed the neighbor's faint smile through the doorway, the soft nod of acknowledgement, and the quiet understanding that this act carried no strings, no judgment. You allowed yourself to linger in that moment, letting relief settle alongside gratitude. There was a subtle reflection that followed, how strange it felt to receive care without transaction, to feel seen without expectation. It was both humbling and uplifting, a gentle reminder that the world can offer kindness even in places where you least anticipate it. That thought, tender and delicate, settled quietly into your consciousness, lingering like the faint aroma of the herbs that had seasoned your soup. Later, as you curled under your blanket, the taste and warmth of the meal still lingering, you traced the feeling of connection quietly in your chest. Compassion had left a soft imprint, a gentle affirmation that human kindness exists even in the smallest gestures. That night, your heart felt slightly lighter, the edges of solitude softened, and sleep approached with a rare, comforting ease. And as the city hummed beyond your window, you let the memory of warmth and care guide you into dreams. It was proof that empathy, gentle and unassuming, can ripple through lives, leaving traces that linger long after the moment passes. The first time you allowed yourself to imagine a future beyond the confines of your current life, it came like a slow dawn, gentle and almost imperceptible. You were curled on your mattress, the city humming softly beyond your window, when a thought drifted in. Maybe, just maybe, there were paths that didn't demand constant vigilance, performance, or compromise. Perhaps a life existed where small joys could accumulate without fear or negotiation. The detail that lingers is the faint light of morning stretching across the floorboards, casting long, soft shadows that seemed to whisper of possibility. You traced them with your fingers absent-mindedly, feeling the warmth of sunlight touching your skin. It wasn't a grand revelation or a promise. It was a quiet invitation to hope, a gentle nudge reminding you that life, however complicated, might still surprise you with grace. The human experience here is the power of imagination, the ability to envision a life beyond the immediate demands of survival. Everyone, at some point, yearns to picture themselves elsewhere in circumstances shaped by desire rather than necessity. That night, your imagination became a compass, a soft light guiding you toward dreams that had long been buried beneath layers of caution and experience. You remember allowing your mind to wander freely, picturing a small apartment with sunlight spilling onto a kitchen counter, a garden of herbs on the windowsill, laughter spilling across rooms, evenings spent reading or sketching or simply being. Each scene was fragile, ephemeral, yet carried a sense of weightless possibility. It was a reminder that even amid hardship, you retained the capacity to envision joy, to hold on to dreams with gentle care. There was a quiet sense of empowerment in that exercise, a realization that hope does not require certainty. You could imagine, plan, and desire without immediate reward or guarantee, and that alone felt revolutionary. Your heart, long tempered by necessity, softened with the gentle thrill of potential, allowing a small, private smile to curl at the edges of your lips. Later, as sleep drew nearer, you let the imagined scenes mingle with reality, softening the edges of the night. The streets outside hummed, the city's rhythm steady and unwavering, and you felt a new alignment within yourself. Possibility, hope, and quiet determination wove themselves together, creating a gentle warmth that settled in your chest. And as you drifted toward dreams, you understood that life, And all its struggles and subtle triumphs carries room for hope, for small joys, and for imagined futures. That night, you embrace the gentle knowledge that even amid darkness, the human heart can reach toward light, crafting visions of life that whisper of resilience, grace, and enduring possibility. The night grows soft now, and the world outside hums in quiet tones, fading into shadows that stretch lazily across your room. You feel the rhythm of your own breath, gentle and steady, carrying the pulse of everything you've endured and experienced. Each heartbeat, each exhale, is a testament to resilience, to the small victories tucked quietly into your life. Let your mind drift slowly, unhurried, tracing the warmth of remembered laughter, the soft echo of kindness, the delicate weight of hope carried through the years. Allow the memories to soften, not in sorrow, but in gentle acknowledgement of growth and survival. Let every small triumph, the coins counted carefully, the apartment claimed, the friendships made, the moments of joy, the quiet independence, settle around you like a soft blanket. Feel the peace that comes from knowing that even in hardship, the human heart finds ways to stretch, to savor, to protect beauty in the smallest details. Imagine the city outside as a distant hum, a lullaby of life moving forward. Inhale slowly, imagining the warmth of tea, the scent of rain on asphalt, the soft glow of lamplight, and the faint comfort of a familiar hand traced along your own reflection. Let all tension slide from your shoulders and your chest, letting calm seep into every corner of your being. Tonight, rest in the knowledge that you have endured, that you have loved, laughed, cried, and dreamed. Your journey carries softness as well as strength, tenderness as well as endurance. Let sleep gather around you, a gentle companion that cradles every thought and memory in a cocoon of quiet. Allow dreams to carry you onward, softly, safely, with the knowledge that every small step, every tender moment, every fleeting joy has mattered.